Morning, Larry.
Good morning, Peter. Very nice to be with you.
Yeah, nice to be with you. I was a few days ago. I was with Marty Bent.
Oh yes, good friend.
Yeah, he told me about a report you'd written. Said I had to read it, which I did.
Yeah.
And then I reached out to Marty. I said, "You doing the interview?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, well, I'll go after you, but I definitely want to talk to Larry. I've got a lot I want to talk to Larry
Well, I
about."
appreciate that. Thank you.
So, you know my show. I
sure do.
Simple. I think you come with a lot of expertise and a lot of interesting things that people like to hear about. But should we just do a bit of a background? So the
Sure. I don't know how deep or how far back you want to go, but I grew up in the Midwest, went to college and studied economics, went to Wall Street for a couple of years, saw what that was all about, got an MBA, and entered the investment business in the early 80s, and really have been an investor my entire career. That's what I focused on. I think my highest and best use is kind of figuring things out. I'm analytical. I like to study stuff. And, it was a very interesting time. I mean, I started in the venture capital business in technology. I mean, the Apple II was out when I was in college or just after college. And then in business school, the IBM PC came out. It was $5,000 and had 20 kilobits of memory. And Mitch Kapoor came to my business school class and showed us Lotus 1, 2, 3, and I thought, wow, that would just totally change everything I'd been doing for the last 2 years because I was doing it all by hand. So I was an investor in technology companies from the early 80s until really 2004, with venture capital, and I saw disk drives and computers and graphic chips and you name it, semiconductors, the whole 9 yards, and that was what I did. And then in 93, I was very fortunate. A guy gave me a business card with an internet address on it. I said, "What's that?" And he said, "This is my internet address. It was CompuServe." Sent all the material there, and I went back to my office, got all my guys. I said, "This internet thing could be big. We got to figure out what this is."
Yeah.
Right. And so we just went and bought as many private internet companies as we could, and some were no good, but many of them were good, and it worked out great. And of course, by the end of it all, in 2000, my partner and I were sitting there and we were looking at the market. We thought this was the most insane bubble we've ever seen. We were selling everything we could. We knew the internet was real, but a lot of these companies weren't. Mm-hmm. We said, are we the only two guys in the world left who believe that a company is worth its discounted future cash flows? And by the way, this reminds me a lot of the market today. Mm-hmm. And we kind of decided to retire for a variety of reasons. We had a fund raised, a $400 million fund. We gave it back. And I retired. And so I started managing my own money, moved from New York to the Boston area. And, I was just kind of cruising along, buying growth at a reasonable price companies. And what happened is the GFC happened. And that was like a wake-up call for this guy.
GFC?
Global financial crisis.
Oh, okay.
Right. So 2008, the housing bubble burst. And boy, did that shock me. And at that point, I thought, well, I'm in pretty good shape here. I'm coaching my kids' teams and got a nice, lifestyle managing my own money. And then I realized I'm going to run out of money because there's going to be a ton of inflation given what the government decided to do. And so that caused me to pivot massively into things that I thought would protect me from inflation, which I still think is the problem of our era, becoming more of a problem as we speak. And so I started investing in gold and silver mining companies and gold and silver bullion, which I'd always held. And that fits into another part of my life, which is, my grandfather was a sound money guy, and I've always been a sound money guy. And he thought what Roosevelt did, confiscating the gold, was wrong, and I agreed, and he gave me a bunch of gold coins when he passed. And so, my belief in sound money is pretty strong, as I know because you've read my material. So
yeah, I have.
That's kind of the background. And as the time has gone by, I've watched with interest as every step has taken place. The Federal Reserve and so on and so forth, and we can go a lot of directions. So I'm look to you for a little direction on where you want to go next.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. Just so you understand my background. I was financially illiterate until, I still kind of am in some ways, but until my 30s, I had no real pension, no real savings. It was only really when I discovered Bitcoin that I really started to think about money and the future and savings. I always felt like I would create a business that would give me a retirement. Right. I got divorced and lost that business, and I was in a position where I was 2 weeks from losing my house. And I know, but I started the podcast, I started to stack Bitcoin. So I leapfrogged from somebody who didn't understand any of this to having to think about savings and Bitcoin, and got introduced to sound money and Austrian economics, which is still relatively new to me, but has kind of saved my retirement in some ways.
Indeed, and relit your career. I mean, you leapfrogged to the right lily pad.
A lot of luck.
I don't know how you found it, but boy, you grabbed the right one because you're sitting on top of the most asymmetric trade in history.
Yeah, but there was a lot of luck involved with that, Larry. I mean, at the time I was, my company had collapsed. I worked in advertising, and I just didn't go to work for a year after my divorce. And
how'd you hear about Bitcoin? I'm curious.
Well, I heard about it in 2013 because I used to take drugs, and there was a website called the Silk Road.
Oh yeah, I know it well.
Well, a friend came around my house, and he was like, no, he phoned me up, and he said, yeah, there's a website you can buy drugs on with Bitcoin. I was like, what are you on about? So he came over and he showed me. I bought my first Bitcoin for £80.
Nice.
Yep. Spent it straight away on the Silk Road. And that's all I did. I never actually looked at Bitcoin at the time.
Interesting.
I did some trading and made and lost money. And Bitcoin hit like 1,200 back then and then crashed. And then I just ignored it. And what happened was it would have been my mum's birthday yesterday. She died a few years ago from cancer. No, it's fine. But she, in some ways, restarted this because when she was suffering, we wanted to get a cannabis oil to treat her.
Sure.
And my dad was like, how do we do this? And I was like, remember I had that problem back in 2013 with drugs? Well, let me tell you about Bitcoin. So what happened was we bought some Bitcoin on Coinbase, and I saw this other thing, Ethereum. We bought the treatment. And because I was out of work and didn't know what to do, I had a little bit of money left over. I just bought some Bitcoin and a bunch of crypto stuff, which I've got rid of now. And then I ended up it's a really long journey, but I ended up on a yoga retreat because I was suffering with chronic anxiety and panic attacks. And this guy called Rich Roll had a podcast, and I just said to him, I like your life. How do you do this? And it's November the 17th, 4 years, I think it's 40 years ago, I released my first show. And here we are now.
And here you are, yeah.
There's a lot of luck.
One of the biggest podcasts, if not the biggest out there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hard work and luck. I just think it's hard work and luck.
It's great, yeah. Well, you landed on a good lily pad.
Well, I did. I feel very fortunate. And I feel the great thing is I don't have to listen to podcasts. I get to have the conversations direct and ask the questions I want. I get to speak to people like you and make these incredible reports. And there's a lot to unpack. Let's go. I think the history is an interesting part, covering the history of what's happened specifically in the US, because you're a anti-federalist.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, so let's talk about sound money and how we've devolved and where it all goes. So just a basic premise, sound money, in my opinion, is a moral issue. And the reason is that, and this has been known for some time. I mean, they said it in the Bible, honest weights and measures, and lots of people have tried to fool with money over time, and there have been hundreds of hyperinflations as a result of printing money and unsound money. And, I mean, as an example, the founding fathers of the U.S. knew about the risks of unsound money because they had the collapse of the Continental during the Revolution. They tried to fund the Revolutionary War with the Continental, and they printed too many, and it collapsed. And so in 1789, when they wrote the Constitution, obviously they specified that only gold and silver could be sound money. That's in the Constitution. And yet, kind of look around, what's going on? It's not exactly being applied, is it, right?
Nope.
And so, from that period of time until 1913, when the Fed was founded, or created, I should say, the country actually did pretty well. We were on a gold and silver standard and kind of quasi both, and there were some issues back and forth about the weighting of the two. But the point is that in general, the money was sound. And so that things which cost a certain amount of money in 1800 cost the same amount in 1880. And there was a time when there was a small amount of inflation, and there was a big presidential campaign that was run on, what this country needs is a good 20-cent cigar, because that's what it used to cost before the inflation. And during that period of time, the improvement in lifestyles and the personal, the common man did incredibly well. There's never been in the history of humankind such a big period of overall wealth creation. People crawled out of poverty. Lifestyles, average lifespan increased, wealth increased. Just the standard of living. In the beginning, in the poorest people in 1900 were living better than some of the richer people in 1789, and that was all in an environment of sound money. And were there some panics and so forth? Yes, and those are what the Keynesians use as an excuse for unsound money. But it's nonsense. It's sophistry. So, and then around 1913, obviously a bunch of money interests got together and said, if we could, and by the way, there's some battles back then too. I mean, there were the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists. Hamilton wanted a central bank, and Jackson threw out the second central bank. It's been a contested issue for a long time, but in general, during that time period, we were on sound money. So the Fed comes along and gets created in Jekyll Island, The Creature from Jekyll Island, fabulous book.
Read the book.
Sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Right? And, they got control of the money. I mean, the powerful, rich people in this country got control of the money supply with the Fed by creating the Fed. And as a result, and they said, well, it's only going to be there to prevent panics. We're just going to discount bills as necessary at a high rate of interest, and then we'll unwind what we've done. All those things are untrue. It didn't take them but a few years, and they started financing World War I. And then they created a bubble in the 20s, an enormous bubble, obviously, which led to the Depression. When that burst, when the stock market bubble in the 20s burst, it led to the Depression. And I mean, the pain was immense. And it's what Bernanke wrote his whole college thesis on, of course, and his PhD thesis on. Of course, he got it wrong. But, nobody believes that because he's an expert on the Great Depression. Right?
Yeah.
And, and today he whatever. So
was that when the FDIC was established?
The FDIC, I think, came later, as I understand it. Well, that might have been part of the SEC and the securities laws.
Yeah.
I don't know the history of the SEC or the FDIC that well. I think it might have been in the same time frame. I know the SEC and a lot of the reforms that took place coming out of the Depression were good. I mean, Glass-Steagall. Separating bank, and we'll come to that in a minute. That was a very important law. It said the banks shouldn't be gambling with shareholder money if the banks are backed up by the Fed, right?
Mnuchin wanted to get rid of it, didn't he?
Oh, well, it was long gone when Mnuchin was there. The people who got rid of it, Larry Summers, Robert Rubin, and that crew are the guys who got rid of it.
Right, okay. I seem to remember Mnuchin debating Elizabeth Warren on Glass-Steagall, but I can't remember the details.
That's very possible. My guess is Warren might have wanted to bring it back. I mean, there's not much of what she says that I agree with, but her point about the banks having an unfair business model, I do agree with.
Yeah.
So having said that, the Fed rolled forward and, they did a lot of things. I mean, they confiscated the gold in 1933. Then they repriced it right after that. So that was a 70% devaluation. And by the way, that sovereign debt crisis, which is really what that was coming out of the Depression, that's what we're going through again. And the reason why I think a lot of people today don't really understand the environment we're in and the investing climate we're in and what to do in this investment climate is that everyone who lived through the last one was dead. I mean, none of us were around in the 20s and 30s. So You have to read the history books to kind of see what's happening. But this is chapter and verse, the same kind of thing going on. So let's keep rolling forward. The Fed goes on and they helped finance World War II, and we had a very compliant population who bought war bonds and. They were repressed because inflation and interest rates were held low when inflation was high, so savers did poorly. And bondholders from the mid 1940s into the 60s and 70s and end of the 70s, they lost money on a real basis because of all the inflation that was there. But there were a lot of good things going on in this country. We won the war; the other countries were destroyed. We had a huge industrial base. We'd built all these things for the war, and we just turned them into building cars. And it was a great time. And then technology got developed, and that brought a lot of deflationary stuff. So there's a lot of good that happened in there with a real little interregnum in the 70s. Okay, so as we all know, right? the Vietnam War, not such a good idea, obviously. Somebody had to pay for it, and Johnson's guns and butter. So he brings in all the social programs, many of which are good. To some degree, but in turn, we also ran the war. We ran these huge deficits. Gold, we were on a Bretton Woods system coming out of World War II. Obviously, they'd set the price of gold at the $35 and held it there. But people in the world could see that we were spending more than we were bringing in, and that was not sustainable. And the French, in particular, Jacques Rouff and and Charles de Gaulle said, these guys are printing money. And we know it. And, you say your dollar's as good as an ounce of gold. Well, at $35, we'll take the gold, please. And so we had 20,000 tons of gold, post-World War II. We now have 8,300, allegedly. Allegedly.
Yeah, interesting.
Right?
This week,
Right.
There was somebody was tweeting out the fact that they think there might not be anything in Fort Knox.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, I've said this in other tweets or other podcasts. I mean, Ron Paul told me he doesn't think there's anything there, and I feel the same way. I think it was too big a honeypot, and it's very likely that they raided it. I could be wrong, but one tell on the subject is why hasn't it been audited since the 50s?
Exactly.
I mean, and if you ask, and people have asked, and they say it's too expensive. Oh, really? You're right. Really? Think of all the billions of dollars the government spends.
You could estimate it pretty easily.
Yeah,
just by taking a photograph.
Right. This is not rocket science. So that's a bullshit answer. So is it there or not? Who knows? And that'll lead into a lot of other things we're going to talk about regarding Bitcoin, why Bitcoin might be a better choice. But the point is that the Fed continually loosened. And what they did was, with every single financial crisis, they provided accommodation. I mean, well, let's play through the 70s. Okay, so the 70s start to play out, and we break the gold standard at 71. That was an enormous event, and we should talk about that more.
Didn't the UK break before though?
Yes,
we did.
The UK did. I don't know the exact year. I believe it was in the early 60s.
Yeah, I think it was like a decade before.
Yeah, I think it was in the early 60s, but. But the U.S. was the dollar was the leading currency at the time, and when that was a big deal. And of course, Nixon said it was temporary. It wasn't, obviously. I mean, 71 years, 1971 to today, and so here we are. We've got the gold standard falling down, and that led to massive inflation in the 70s. And as we all know, kind of consistently, I mean, the price of oil and gold. Oil went up 30% a year compound throughout the entire period. Gold went up 18% a year. The entire period compound. Actually, I switched those around. Gold went up 30. I think oil went up 18. So there was a massive inflationary period, and there was a time at the late 70s, and I remember it quite well, when people were thinking, the dollar's going to fail. I mean, we're going to have hyperinflation, and the dollar's going to fail. And Reagan won. Paul Volcker came in, and he created a solution, which was to take interest rates at 20%, which nearly bankrupted my father's business. I remember it quite well, eating tuna fish sandwiches and being very scared that we weren't going to make it, and they did get inflation under control with 20% interest rates, but it was pretty brutal. A lot of businesses suffered, a lot of people suffered, but then that and the combination of kicking off of the technology stuff started to create a long period of deflation from 1980 to present, really, and that was fabulous for financial assets and really good for the world. I mean. One of the things I find most interesting and amazing is the fact that, if you think about how much more technology we have today than we had in 1980, look at what computers have done. Look at how they've, we should all be working, 30-hour weeks and living lives of leisure if we'd been able to transfer that technology value to the greater populace. But what's happened is that because we've got a system that allows the people at the top to rake off the profits, i.e. because we've got a broken monetary system, what it's done is all that excess value created by that productivity has flowed to the top. And so we've got billionaires, and then the rest of the poor people in the world, middle class, average people, work twice as hard to keep their head above water. And that's to me, the fundamental theme that I'm working on. There's a moral basis to sound money. I mean, the Fed prints money, simply said. I mean, you can talk about how it flows. You can talk about the fact that it goes into bank reserves and they have to lend. I don't care. All those things are true, but the fact of the matter is M2 has gone up consistently. I've got a chart on our website that you can see that very clearly, and that rate of growth is getting higher and higher and higher. And we're now at the point where it's about to go straight up, in my opinion, right?
Well, scary times. Again, lot to unpack there, but just want to ask you quickly about deflation.
Sure.
Because I always saw the news reports, the reports of inflation to 1.5%, 2.5%, government target of 2%. And I grew up with the belief that inflation was a natural part of the economy, something that was signifying growth. As somebody who doesn't really understand economics, my dad would be watching the news and I'd see it in the background. And I was always kind of taught that deflation is really bad because if we have deflation, then people will stop spending money because they expect things to get cheaper in the future, yada yada. Yeah. A bit like the same reason you don't spend Bitcoin because you think it'll be worth more in the future. Right. Is that just government propaganda that allows
I believe it is. It's Keynesian propaganda. I mean, so I think that the authoritative book on this is The Price of the Future, written by Jeff Booth, which I'm sure you've read. You probably had a podcast with him.
Yeah,
right?
I have. Great guy.
So we live in a deflationary world, and deflation's a good thing. We had deflation from 1789 to 1913. The average person, their wages didn't go up, but what they could buy with their wages went up. And so deflation represents efficiency. Deflation represents you can do more with less. And so sound money leads to a natural rate of deflation. And the whole notion that you need these animal spirits to grow, that's what Keynes said, you need these animal spirits to grow demand and to grow an economy. That's a flawed notion. In a world with limited resources, think about it, compound growth forever, we're going to eat the world. The world's going to blow up. We can't have compound growth. We've got to align the monetary system with an economic system that makes sense. And the issue isn't about having growth. The issue is about having efficiency. How do you get more for less? That's what deflation is. Same amount of money get you more goods and services. And so deflation is good. And I think our kids will know that. I think our grandkids will know that. I think everybody will come to understand that. What's good about inflation? Oh, gee, all the stuff I buy, it's going to cost more next year. What's good about that? There's nothing good about that. How about if I save this capital and don't buy things I don't need and don't chase stuff, that money will get used into something that will make things more efficient and things will be cheaper next year. The perfect example, remember after 9/11 when George Bush got up there and said, everybody go buy an SUV? Did that really make sense? Was that really the right piece of advice to give? How about we become a nation of savers again, and we're prudent? I know it sounds really radical, right?
Well, people don't save. Amongst my friends,
why should you? Why should you? It's the evil line that Keynes used, which was, in the long run we're all dead. It's kind of like, well, okay, so let's party like animals and get knockout blind drunk and pass out and not worry about the long term. Or you can say, no, I'm going to take care of my body and I'm going to eat sensibly and I'm going to sleep and I'm going to rest and I'm going to get stronger and I'm going to live a sensible life. There really are kind of just two views of the world, right? Mm-hmm. One view is, party on, Garth, and the other view is, no, be smart about this. Let's try to be intelligent.
Time preference that a lot of, Safedine introduced to everybody. Time preference.
Exactly. And yeah, time preference and long time preference. You can tell who long time preference people are. They eat well, they work out, they sleep, they treat people well. It's a much better moral code than, the 1980s, Gordon Gekko, I'm going to get mine, greed is good. Let's grow this thing. Let's run up the numbers. More is better than less. How much do you really need? Do you really need billions to live a decent life? And is that the right measure of what a decent life is? I don't know.
Well,
I don't believe so. Right?
You have it in your Twitter, fix the money, fix the world.
Fix the money, fix the world.
Because it seems to me that the moral decline in society is very much aligned to the money.
Absolutely. They track. You look at Weimar Germany. That was an incredibly immoral period of time. And look, when people see other people lying and getting away with it and doing well as a result of it, they say to themselves, well, why shouldn't I do that too? I'm the sucker here. I'm playing by the rules and I'm the sucker, right?
Well, I feel like the veil is being lifted finally.
Oh, yeah.
I think people have realized, hold on, we're being lied to. And it's funny, I think there's a lot of defense now out for the billionaires with what Janet Yellen came out recently saying taxing unrealized gains, which logically doesn't make any sense.
That's
There's
impossible.
no logic.
How are you going to do it?
Well, and then my friend VJ Boyapati, I'm pretty sure he said originally income tax was only meant to be for the rich, and now we have 40% income tax. If they're going to tax unrealized gains for the billionaires, they'll come for everyone. But it doesn't make any sense.
Look, the state lives to keep the state alive and to make the state bigger. When you're in that game, you're all about growth and control and so on and so forth. Think about what the American Revolution was about. It was like a 4% tax on tea. 4%. If I paid 4% taxes on something today, I'd be very happy, right? The state has really grown to be a leviathan, and some people worship it. Some people think that it is the solution to all of the problems, and yet I would argue that long spans of human history can show that people can self-organize, and they can do very well on their own. But not a lot of people. Those of us who believe that we were a very small group. We are becoming a bigger group. I think Bitcoin is educating people. I think the failure of the money is going to be a real wake-up call for a lot of people. And I'm not with Jack. I think he heard my last podcast and he retweeted that he thinks we're going to see hyperinflation. I don't know. It's possible. Okay, it's definitely within the realm of outcomes, but I don't think right away. I think more likely what we're going to see is we're going to see pretty high and persistent inflation. And I'm hoping that that's going to lead to some serious reform because I think that's what's needed.
Well, there's two things to talk about there. Firstly, we'll talk about the inflation, then we'll talk about the reform, because I think most interestingly, the reform is coming in the form of Bitcoin, and everyone has an opportunity to become part of it.
Well, that's right.
And I like this idea of a decentralized sound money.
Absolutely.
Which anyone can opt into, which is great.
Yeah, no, it's perfect game theory, right? The only defense about Bitcoin, you got to buy it.
Yeah.
And everyone gets the price they deserve. I've been kind of progressively orange-pilled. I started a long time ago, but I was small in it. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, I was afraid the thing would blow up. I thought, it's a computer, it can blow up, right? I've seen too many computer things blow up.
We're all afraid of that.
Yeah, right. And so, so I didn't get, but now, we've got 12 years of data points, and we've got a lot more systems around it, and the core guys have done a lot more stuff to protect it. And I'm kind of the view that, well, the odds of that happening have gone down substantially, right?
Well, let's talk about the current inflation levels and what's happening.
Sure.
So I spoke with Lynn Alden a couple of days ago, and I asked
great.
her. She's amazing, and she said, "Well, hyperinflation is month on month plus 50% inflation," and I would be very surprised to see that in the US, the UK. I would have thought the central banks would respond and put us through a painful period of high interest rates to kind of curb that situation. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I have no experience in this. I've not lived through. I feel like I've been lucky to live through a fairly stable 40 years of life.
We all have. I mean, I've had a very good life in a very good country, and as broken as things are, it hasn't been bad. And, this is the fourth turning, right? And to Lynn's point and your point, the Fed's really trapped. I mean, if they try to really jack interest rates, it's not going to work. I mean, one, they're very far behind the curve, in my opinion. They're going to taper fine. Throughout the 70s, interest rates were going up, and gold still kept going up. I mean, gold was the Bitcoin of its day back in the 70s. There was no Bitcoin, but the point is that they really can't. I mean, they're kind of they've got a devil's choice of if they try to save the money, they're going to croak the economy and the debt structure. It's all just going to collapse, and it's going to look like the 1930s. And if they don't do that, and they try to keep the system going, and keep the growth going, and just continue with what they've got, the inflation is just going to get away from them, and it's going to be runaway. I mean, Stan Fisher, who used to be the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve, wrote a number of good papers on this, where he said, we're going to have to go direct, we're going to have to print more, we're going to have to do all kinds of unconventional financial repression policies. And the only issue that we face there is they know they need inflation. Okay, they definitely need inflation, because with debt at 130% of GDP, you can't grow out of that without,
Nope.
So, but they were able to do it in World War II. But this time, they need inflation, but they don't need too much inflation. And as Stan Fisher said, once it gets started, it's pretty hard to stop. I mean, inflation's kind of a vicious circle. Some guy has to pay more for something. He says, I want more wages. The company says, fine, I'll give you more wages, but I've got to up my price, and so on, right? And particularly, we're at this extreme where we have enormous negative interest rates. We have zero interest rate policy in many places. We've really run this deflationary, thread about as far as you can run it. And so, with all due respect to Lacey Hunt, Jeff Snyder, and other deflationists, Rosie, I think it's over. I mean, I think, Ronnie Stover really said it very well at a conference out in Beaver Creek, the gold conference. He said, a monetary tipping point. I mean, this is like, the Archduke getting shot in Sarajevo. I mean, it's changed. We are now in an inflationary environment. Get used to it, get ready for it, prepare for it, protect yourself against it.
Yeah. And again, very interesting you should say that, because when I spoke with Lynn, she said the next decade will be defined by inflation.
I can't see any other way.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the numbers, look at the evidence. I mean, and there are a lot of kinds of inflation too, Peter. I think it's important to understand. There's demand, there's cost push, there's demand pull. Those are all the kind of traditional ways. There's another one that I've kind of invented a word for, which is substitution inflation, and that goes to just the issue of people suddenly realize that their currency is losing value. It's Gresham's law, right? And they say it's not about buying stuff or selling stuff. It's about what assets they're going to hold in their savings in. Everybody has some savings. Everybody has some net worth. Not everybody, but most people have some net worth. Where are you going to put it? You want to protect it, right? You want to have a sound retirement. You want to save for a rainy day, whatever it might be. And traditionally, bonds, stocks, those kinds of things have all been pretty good places to be. Real estate, certainly. That can change. And when people realize, bonds in particular, when people realize bonds are just a melting ice cube, the bond market's going to get hammered here. I mean, I have very little doubt about that. And the Fed's probably going to have to buy the whole thing, right? Yeah, yield curve control, right?
Yeah.
And once you see the Fed buying the whole thing, I mean, and again, it all goes back to,
Ponzi.
remember, it's a Ponzi. And also, the reason the dollar works is because, we have a government, we trust our government, we won World War II, we got all the weapons, we've got these serious people at the Fed saying like they're watching it very carefully, et cetera, but it's all a Potemkin village. It's all a facade. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the facts behind that, it's empty. There's nothing supporting this dollar. And so the dollar is the emperor walking down the street naked, right? And Bitcoin and gold, to a degree, we're the little boy sitting there going, hey, that guy's got no clothes on. What's going on here? Well, you guys believe this shit, right?
The interesting thing is, I think you could walk down Broadway, sure, and you could ask 100 people, and I only think a few people will really understand what's going on. Like my friends don't understand. I tell you a funny story. So I use my Facebook with all my friends and family as just a testing ground for ideas, just to put things out there. And I've been talking about Bitcoin and inflation. Sure. I'm like a broken record with this. Right. I've had people unfollow me because they think I'm crazy. And I'm like, no, this is happening. I said inflation's coming. I'm only sharing what other people are telling me. And I was like, UK had the biggest rise in inflation. Now we've got massive increase in energy costs. We've had record fuel prices. We've got house prices leaping up. Richie Sunak just came out with a 4% prediction.
Sure.
The Bank of England said 5% next year. It's probably much higher. And people just are not paying attention to this. I just think people don't really fully understand what's going on in the economy or how bad it can get.
Well, yes, definitely they don't understand how bad it can get. I think, I use my gym as my data point because I get a broad cross-section of people who work out with me.
Yep.
And they all see the inflation. But you raise a very good point. They don't know what causes it. But let me give you a little anecdote that was fun. And it was a while back, but I don't know if you ever saw the video of Andrew Dice Clay, and he was out on a corner in LA, and he had a Hershey's candy bar, and he had a 10-ounce silver wafer, or silver bar. And people were walking by, and he said, for free, your choice. Which would you like, the Hershey bar or the 10 ounces of silver? I swear 85% of them took the Hershey bar. They had, the 10 ounces of silver at the time, silver was $10, it was $100. They didn't care. They wanted the Hershey bar. Right? So yes, but people are coming to see the inflation. And that's part of why, I do what I do with respect to Twitter and other things. I think there are a lot of great people in this country, and a lot of people could get hurt. And I think the policies these people have set up are irresponsible. And I think people should try to protect themselves. But I think, and I see a lot of political chatter about all manner of things. And I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, all that stuff is really real, but let's get to the base of the problem. The base of the problem is unsound money. If we have sound money, a lot of these other problems would go away. They really would. And I don't think, I think Bitcoiners get that. Not every Bitcoiner. Some Bitcoiners are just like, hey, price goes up. I like it. Give me some of that. Price goes up.
And we'll go up,
yeah. But I think a lot of the Bitcoiners get it. Certainly if you've read Safe's book, you get it. Mm-hmm. That, this is sound money is a really important societal issue. And I want my kids and grandkids to live in a better country than we live in today. And I remember what it was like growing up. This was a great country. It still is a great country, but it's gone downhill since my youth. I know that.
Well, there's no country I've traveled to more than the US. This is like my 75th time here. Okay. Every opportunity I get to come here, I come, and I've traveled to a wide range of places. I think I've done like 19 of the states now.
Awesome.
I have a great time in left-leaning states. I have a great time in right-leaning states. Mm-hmm. I find the people are brilliant. I absolutely love America. I can go anywhere. I can go into a bar, and I'm pretty sure I can sit down with a Republican and a Democrat, and we can have a great conversation. Yep. I think the broken part of this country is the media and the politics.
Yes.
And I put a lot of it at Roger Ailes' door and Rupert Murdoch because they created the division. And I also think social media is causing a problem. But I think it's a very small group of people who are causing the problem for everyone else.
It's
still a great country.
I completely agree. And that's why, one of the things that gives me great hope is that we've got, let's say it in a slightly different way, the elites have crafted a narrative that really serves them, right? They really benefit from this system. They're very, very wealthy. And, why wouldn't they like it? Do you know what I mean? It works for them. They got a ton of money. I see, Janet Yellen saying there's no inflation. Well, she's got a $20 million net worth. She doesn't feel it, right? But how about the person who's working hard for every dollar and their cost of food just went up substantially? But the problem is that person is so busy trying to put money, on the treadmill, trying to put money on the table that they don't have time to listen to podcasts from you, and they don't necessarily haven't been introduced to Bitcoin, and they don't necessarily understand all these issues, and it's tragic. It's really sad that message has not gotten out, and that's that is, you say, well, social media is part of the problem, maybe, but it's also part of the solution.
Oh, agreed. Yeah.
Right.
No,
I
agreed.
mean, that's what, we can use this for really. It's just a tool. We can use this for really good purposes, right? And some of us, I believe, are. Yourself, Marty, George Gammon. I mean, you name it. There, Luke. I mean, there are just a number of people out there who get it, who are trying hard to fix it. And what I'm hoping is that when the whole thing collapses, which I believe it will. I mean, I think the math is pretty unassailable. When I believe it will, that those of us who understand what went wrong, why it went wrong, will step into the breach and try and say, okay, guys, listen, the money failed. And the fundamental issue is the money is bad. I mean, you can't believe any prices right now. The money is bad.
I'll give you an anecdote on believing prices. I was in Texas for a week, and I was one of my friends there was explaining to me they've got a local taco shop, and he showed me this photo. It's behind the counter. They have all the menu and the prices next to it. Mm-hmm. He said they've taken the prices off now. Yeah, because they can't guarantee the prices of things because of the changing costs of the produce they need. It's so inconsistent. So they're now pricing it. That rather than changing the price all the time, there's just no price, and you go and order, and they give you a price, and a second person works for a company which does POS software, and what they're now having to do, they're having to update the POS software to now have prices update based on the price of the produce coming in because produce changes. So when he explains this to me, I was like, that makes me think of two things. It makes me think of when I took a visit to Venezuela a couple of years ago. Sure. Wonderful people again, under a horrible authoritarian regime which has pillaged the country. And there was a store I went into, and the prices were stickers. So they just replaced the prices. Right. So it made me think of that. But it also made me think I've read When Money Dies about the Weimar Republic.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go.
Great book. but really, it's a story of anecdotes. It's a book of anecdotes. Yes. A chain of anecdotes to take you through a period of time of all the different things that were happening. I was like, that's a signal.
Yeah, that's a signal. Exactly.
Going to Starbucks, we don't have any sandwiches. That's a signal.
Yes.
My friend who can't get a shipping container, that's a signal. All it is, we have all these signals now for what is going to be the book of potentially this decade.
No doubt. I mean, another very good signal, I'm sure you've seen it. Have you seen how these auto dealers who were having a hard time getting cars, manufacturer suggested retail price $50,000, delivery charge $30,000.
Yep.
And call it price gouging, call it whatever you want. I mean, they're being capitalistic. They don't have things to sell, so they're just trying to balance supply and demand. I mean, it's pretty basic stuff, right? You take away the supply, you leave the demand the same. The price got to go up, and of course that flows through to everything else, right? So it's a nasty, vicious circle, and it's been created because the Fed just kept putting coins in the fuse box, right? Rather than allow us to take a recession, allow interest rates to rise like they naturally would, allow the system to function the way it was designed to function, they've done everything the opposite to continue to keep it growing, keep the money flowing, keep the Wall Street bubble going, enrich themselves, enrich the billionaires, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, 2008 was the classic example of that, and makes me, just furious what happened, to be honest with you. I mean, they blew an enormous, then The Big Short does a great job of documenting it. It's a movie. They blew an enormous bubble, fine. And when the time came to pay the piper, okay, we hit the end point and we got to pay for it. The government, they went to the government and the government said, oh, no, don't worry about it. We'll bail you out. And a year later, they were all paying record bonuses. So it was incredibly unfair because it was, socialism for the rich and connected and the bankers and the people who blew the bubble. And it was raw, rugged capitalism for the poor homeowners who had to, basically lose their house if they weren't able to make their mortgage payments, as a result of the downturn and the loss in employment. In my quarterly report, in my speech that I just gave at the New Orleans Gold Show, I'm going to have a great photo of a spray painted on the wall of a house in California that said, 3 tours in Iraq, foreclosed, 3 tours in Iraq, and no bailout for people like me. And that they've broke the social contract. They really have.
Nobody went to jail. Well, one guy went to jail.
Nobody went to jail. And they all, Dick Folds worth $650 million. It's the social contract has been broken. And so these people gained hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, but they lost their soul and their credibility in the process, and they helped to ruin the country.
So I'm glad you brought up The Big Short, because I think that's a film that's able to contextualize what actually happened to people who aren't economists or people who don't have time.
Right.
But the thing about that film that really got me, I thought was so powerful, is just, I think I've talked about this on the show before, just at the very end where the family pack up and they get in their car and essentially they've lost their home. And that was the reality of what happened. I mean, can't remember the numbers. Was it like 1 million people lost their home? 2 million people?
Many. Yeah, I mean...
Now BlackRock owns them.
Yeah, right. BlackRock owns them, and and Munchin, Steve Mnuchin, he foreclosed on them with his IndyMac, and IndyMac. That's another crony capitalist deal. He had full backing of the government, in order to
One West, wasn't it?
I think it was Indy West. Or
did he rebrand it as One West?
Oh, maybe he did. I'm not aware of that. But anyway, long story short, he had a one-way ticket. If the government backed him, if it had failed, he'd have been guaranteed. Yep. And he had a call option on relighting all those houses, and he possessed. He foreclosed on them and made $1 trillion. Or billions of dollars. And so, that kind of thing is that's why people in this country are angry, and rightly so. Absolutely rightly so, and why we absolutely have to go back to sound money, and I believe we will go back to sound money. People on the left are angry, people on the right are angry. To some degree, I'm sympathetic to both sides if they're because things are broken. They really are broken. There's no doubt about that.
A lot of people are going to lose. Let me ask you something with regards to. You said that they really needed to allow the economy to go through a period of pain and. Default and recover, a bit like the Ray Dalio video, how the economic machine works. I've asked this a number of times to various people, but I wonder if the problem with that is the election cycle, because for any president to allow that to happen, they have to be the president that potentially takes the country into recession, and their legacy is that. And so does the election cycle really just create that someone has to kick the can down the road?
I think that's right, but it's not just, a couple things there. How powerful is the president? Is the president really running the show?
Well, let's say the party.
Yeah, okay. Broader, possibly. Certainly that's a possible. But again, the Federal Reserve is really not even, they're linked to the government, but they're not a part of the government. It's a private organization. The government even unto itself is, everything's not as it appears, right? There are other people pulling strings, in my opinion, of the government. And so, but yes, your point's a good one. There's no doubt that nobody wants to be in charge when the whole thing collapses, and everybody does hope to kick the can. I'm sure these Fed people, when they get out of there, they're happy. I got to believe.
Haven't two quit recently?
Yeah, right. Two quit recently, and my gut is that Kaplan's sitting there thinking, "Thank God, I don't want to be around when the shit hits the fan," and of course, they're going to replace the two that quit. Were kind of on the hawkish side. They'll probably get replaced with doves. So it's. Jay Powell, Danielle DiMartino Booth says that there's a Game of Thrones going on inside, and Jay Powell wants to maintain his position. I think he's nuts. If I were him, I would want to be out of there so damn fast, because, there's a mathematical piece to this, and so it's the second derivative, right? Things are happening quickly now. They're happening more quickly. We printed $3 trillion from 2008 to 2011. So it's 3 years. This time around, we printed $3 trillion or more. Almost more than that between in 4 months, right? And when the next crisis comes, we're going to have to print $10 trillion. And each one of these rolling crises will make it more obvious to more people that this money is no good and I have got to get out. And at the end, it's Hemingway. You go bankrupt slowly and then suddenly. At the end, it's going to be suddenly. It really is going to be suddenly. And this is the substitution thing I was talking about earlier. When people decide that their money is melting, that it's a melting ice cube, they're going to buy Bitcoin and gold and silver. They just are. Or they're going to buy real estate. And we're already seeing that, right? The housing prices are going up. It's a great trade. It's a hard asset. You can borrow money at 30 years at 3%. Yep, I'll do that. Sure. A house is a house. I can live in it. So people aren't stupid with respect to what's going on with the money, but not everybody understands how deep it is and how we've got to get back to sound money to have things be repaired. And it's going to be a tough transition for sure, but it'll be much better on the other side.
Well, wouldn't it be great if we taught financial literacy and sound money in school? I mean, I did 2 years of economics, but that was optional. That was my A levels.
Right.
That was my senior years,
Yeah.
and we were taught Keynesian economics.
Of course you were. Yeah, of course you were. And Keynes is wrong. I mean, Keynes is just wrong. I mean, that's a whole another line. I thought we could get into my feelings about Keynes. They're not very positive.
And is it the same for Paul Krugman?
Yeah, right. Or same with Paul Krugman. But that's, if you were I subscribe to the Austrian School of Economics, which is much more, in my opinion, realistic and predictive of what has happened and how the world works. And as a result of that, the Austrians have been ignored. They've been completely ignored and shut out of academia. And academia gets money from the government. I mean, you have to remember that, when a government gets set up the way it is and the people benefit from being a part of the government and sucking up to the tit of the government, they are going to do everything they can to suppress narratives and people who call the emperor naked. And the Austrians, for quite some time now, have said, hey, this emperor is naked. You're printing money, and that's theft. I mean, back to the moral issue of all this. I mean, we would all agree. I mean, I wouldn't come in here and steal your watch or steal your wallet. That would be theft. That would be immoral. Well, that's what the Federal Reserve does. All of us who earn money, we have dollars. We exchange our labor for dollars. We put it in our pocket. We call it savings. But every year the Fed dilutes that because they print more dollars that they can print with just the stroke of a key. And as a result, your savings are worth less. So, Peter, somebody just took, and by the way, the CPI numbers are completely misstated. I mean, shadow government stats and Chapman have shown that. I mean, CPI is probably running 10, 15% right now. Certainly when you get the housing component in there, it'll adjust up to that. So, the fact of the matter is that, every year, how do you feel about every year the government taking 10% of your savings? And I know how I feel about it. I don't like it. And the average person shouldn't like it either. And there's a way to fight it. And it's simple. Buy gold, buy silver, buy Bitcoin.
Well, let's talk about sound money then. So what are the myths of sound money? Because there are some people who are very critical of Austrian economists and think they're crackpot libertarians. But what do people get wrong about sound money?
That's a good question. I mean, I think they think it's old-fashioned. Well, one of the ones they start with is to say the gold standard caused the Depression. Okay, that's the first and biggest lie they tell.
Okay.
And Bernanke wrote his entire thesis on that, his PhD thesis on how the Depression was caused and the fact that we were on sound money. It was the gold standard. And by the way, we weren't on sound money because Roosevelt devalued at 70%. So we had a mini hyperinflation during the Depression. But the fact of the matter is the Depression was caused, or the Depression was just an equal and opposite reaction to the bubble that was blown in front of it. The Fed was very lax post-World War I, and as a result, they let a lot of money into the system. They held interest rates down well below where they should have been, and so we blew an enormous bubble, credit bubble, and as a result of that credit growth and stock market bubble, when it collapsed, it was enormously deflationary. That's the issue. Not, what happened there is not something to do with sound money. And in fact, the fact that we were on a gold standard, after we revalued, and the fact that we were on a gold standard was actually a net positive. So one of the things they get wrong is to say the gold standard was responsible for the Depression. It was not. It was completely not. Anyone who studies it, intellectually and is intellectually honest about it would come to that conclusion. Now, Bernanke was not intellectually honest because he obviously foresaw a future in the Federal Reserve System and in the government and in the system that we now have, and so he had to support everything the Fed did. And in fact, he said, they didn't do enough. They should have done more. I mean, he has that famous 1982 speech where he says, which by the way I think was an incredibly irresponsible thing to do, where he said, "Look, we can never have deflation." He looked at the Depression. He said, "Look, there was massive deflation. It caused massive pain." Rather than diagnosing that and saying, yes, and that's because the Fed was lax and let the bubble get blown, he said, no, that's because the Fed didn't print enough to prevent the deflation. Well, by the way, they printed a ton. But set that aside for a moment. That was the wrong conclusion, okay? And so what he said is, look, we don't have to worry about inflation. His 1982 speech, it was famous. It'll be in the history books. I mean, he's kind of the John Law of our time. Well, pre-Stephanie Kelton. But he... it'll be in the history books where he said, look, we have a technology called a printing press that ensures that we can create dollars at zero cost. And as a result of that, we will never suffer deflation again in this country. And so right there, that was the major coin being put in the fuse box. Okay, we're not going to let any serious monetary corrections take place. That's what he said. And as a result of that, we've just had this continuing wave of, greater and greater inflations. And each one has to be bigger than the last. I mean, a good analogy in my view in terms of looking at this monetary stuff is think of it as like a heroin addict, right? You just have to keep taking more.
Keep taking more.
You got to take more to get the high, and
otherwise you crash.
And it just, I think the analogy is pretty good, right?
As a previous addict who's been through recovery, it's a perfect analogy.
Right, and by the way, I mean, I've heard stories from people who've been through this whole thing that, the crash is almost as bad as dying. I mean, the crash is pretty damn bad coming out of this stuff. So,
but after the crash, you feel good.
Yes, there is a recovery. If you don't die, there is a recovery. And by the way, if you don't crash and you keep doing, eventually one of those times you're going to hit an OD, and then you do die.
Yep.
So, sadly, but looking at time and slopes and math and everything that's going on, I kind of feel like we're getting pretty close to an OD moment here. I mean, how are they going to bring it back? I don't know.
So it's quite interesting that you're previously a gold bug and a silver guy, and you now got into Bitcoin. Not every gold bug has managed to get it. There's one quite well known.
Yeah, we all know him.
We all know him, Mr. Peter Schiff. He just can't get it, and
it's too bad.
I think that's more about ego than anything.
Possibly. I mean, some say it's actually his marketing pitch.
Maybe it's not. I don't think it's a great one, but by the by, for some gold bugs, it's been hard to get across. You did. What was your Bitcoin introduction?
Imagine being frustrated. Imagine having all the stuff right. I mean, I said it in my speech in New Orleans. Imagine having this whole thing right. I mean, you just got it figured out, and then this other thing comes along and supplants your asset. I get it. I completely get it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just different because I was in the venture capital business. And I'm a big believer in the future, and I'm a big believer in technology, and I'm a big believer in things getting better as a result of technology. And so, look, I had some of the initial skepticism that everybody has, and I think everybody who comes to accept Bitcoin as being important goes through a bunch of phases, right? Oh, that's ridiculous. To, oh my God, how could I have anything else? I got to have 100% this, right? and I would never get there. But the layers, you peel the layers back, right? And so the history of it all is I tried to buy some back when you were, buying at 80 pounds. It was hard to buy it then. You had to meet somebody in a cafe and get a code, and it wasn't very available. I bought my first ones off of the Coinbase, off the Mt. Gox blow up. In fact, I was trying to get an account at Mt. Gox. Fortunately, I didn't, because I know people who did and they lost all their money. But I was fortunate. Like right after the Mt. Gox blow up, it traded up a bit. It hit 1,000 at one point, and I said, okay, I'll wait for correction. Sure enough, it corrected down to 300 or 400, and I started buying. And I've kind of bought since then consistently. But always with gosh, is this really going to work? Is this technology sound? Are people going to really adopt it? I mean, yeah, I get it, and it's a libertarian dream, but maybe it's going to blow up.
I think we all feel like that. Yeah. Tell me, you were down at this gold event in New Orleans. How much talk of Bitcoin was there?
Well, so this is pretty interesting, right? I think you'll enjoy this. There were probably 300 people there, and a lot more online. A lot of people don't go to conferences anymore. And one of the speakers asked the question, said, okay, folks, how many of you here own Bitcoin? Half the hands went up.
Wow.
Right? So there are a lot of people who are in my camp, right? They came from the gold world. I mean, look, pre-2008, we didn't have Bitcoin, right? You believed in sound money. You had a couple of choices, gold, silver stocks, period. That was about it. Real estate. Bitcoin got invented, a lot of growing pains. Obviously it's become much more mainstream now. And a lot of gold people are like, yeah, I get it. And some, I have one friend who said, look, Larry, he was 100% gold. I mean, all gold, and he's now 100% Bitcoin, has no gold, sold it all.
Wow.
Yeah, right? And he said to me, he said, Larry, the reason gold isn't working, the reason you feel like Sisyphus is that, the central banks have figured out how to control it. They've got the price suppressed. They've created so much paper gold that the price hasn't gone up the way it should be. We've got these really brilliant guys over here with this technology, which serves the same purpose as gold. They're like the rebels with the torches and the pitchforks. They're storming the citadel of the central banks, and they're going to take over. And, I want them to win, and they're going to win. And to be honest with you, I think he's right to a degree, but that doesn't make gold irrelevant. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make gold, I think some of the Bitcoiners are just like, well, gold is a buggy whip, and, why would you ride a horse when you could be in a car? And my view is that they both beat walking, but, they're different assets, right? I mean, gold, gold is obviously less volatile. Gold doesn't have 80% drawdowns. Big drawdown on gold would be 20%. Gold is more private. If you have gold coins and nobody knows you have them. The blockchain's there for everyone to see. Now they don't. It's pseudonymous, so you don't necessarily know whose address is whose. But that could change. The government could come after that, and we'll all face some interesting decisions. But in my opinion, as a professional money manager, as a manager of risk and an investment person, there's a place in a portfolio for both, and it depends on what your risk profile looks like. And if you want to be super conservative, you have much more gold than you have Bitcoin. If you want to be super aggressive, you go much heavier in Bitcoin than gold. But I actually think everybody, even Bitcoiners, should own both. I mean, I made this point in another podcast where, I bought Bitcoin. I bought gold. I bought Bitcoin at 17,000, right? And then it fell to 10,000. It fell to 3,500. If I had been 100% Bitcoin at 17,000 and that had happened, where would I have had the cash to buy the balance, right? And, I mean, I sold gold to buy Bitcoin at 10. I sold gold to buy Bitcoin at 3,500. I mean, there's some balancing that can go on here, right? And there's a point. They're both sound money assets. We cannot deny that. One's 5,000 years old. One's 12 years old, but 13 years old. But there's some balancing and allocation that you can do that I think is sensible, right?
Well, it's funny because a couple of times this year I've nearly bought some gold. A couple of times I've had some spare cash. And I've thought, shall I buy some gold? And then I've tried to go through the process of getting it, and it just felt a bit painful. So I ended up buying more Bitcoin. So I don't own any, but I understand the argument for it.
Look, you're probably going to be right, and if I think some of it has to do with age. I mean, frankly, if you're young and you got a lot of time to recover, and probably the most important thing about being 100% Bitcoin is to be sure you're not going to be blown out on a drawdown. I mean, I see people pumping it. I see people talking about it. I see people who don't really understand it, maybe chasing it and buying it. And I think it's sad if they buy it, say today at 60 or whatever it is. And what if we do have a 50% drawdown? If they can mentally process a 50% drawdown, or heaven forbid an 80% drawdown, and they know they won't sell it, have at it. They've got a long time preference. They believe in the asset. They're going to be fine. What I think is sad, because I know people like this, is the people who bought it because everyone recommended it at Thanksgiving in 2017, and it went to 10 and it went to 35, and oh shit, I blew that, and they blew it out.
Yeah.
Right?
They sold out the bottom.
They sold out at the bottom, right.
Yeah.
And so, to me, what's important is that, you've got to be in it longer term if you're gonna be in it, and you've got to understand the volatility of it when you buy it. You can't just listen to your friendly Bitcoin guru that, oh, this is great, buy it, it only goes up. And then when it doesn't, you freak out, right?
You have to get through that first 4 years. I think it's easy after 4 years.
I think that's right. Yeah, when your average cost basis is well below where it's at, you're kind of like, hey, this is great.
Yeah.
And then it's also a matter of how far down the curve you are in terms of understanding it. You hear about the threats, you hear about the FUD, and so you go investigate them, and you say, all right, well, is it going to destroy the planet in terms of electricity? No. Rick Carter proved it. It's 0.5% of the electrical use in the world. I mean, that's a small price to pay for sound money.
Very small price to pay.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the guy at Fortune came out today and did a report like it was $100 per transaction. It's like, yeah. And my friend Josh tweeted it out. He said, "Are we still doing this?"
Yeah.
And then my brother did some research and found out the guy is behind Fortune have invested in a blockchain company that wants to tap into the $150 billion payments market in Asia. So it's like, okay, there's your incentives. You want to attack Bitcoin because of your bullshit project.
That's exactly right. I mean, unfortunately, there have been some sleazy actors in other crypto areas, and it has cast a pall upon some of the Bitcoiners, and rightfully so. Some of the Bitcoiners are very angry about that because Bitcoin is not, it's not a sleazy coin like some of these others are.
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting year, 2 years ahead. It's because if we do see a crash, Bitcoin has been a risk-off asset. So will it crash with it, or are we going to make that leap? Are people suddenly realizing? I think people are suddenly starting to realize with Bitcoin.
Oh, I do too. I mean, I think there's one remaining risk in my mind, and that is Tether. I think the Tether thing is bad news. We've made an investment in a company called Avanti, run by Caitlin Long.
Yeah, I know, the bank in Wyoming.
Yeah, right. And she wants to do a fully reserved, stable coin, and that's the way it should be. And she's talking to the SEC and she's talking to the Fed. I mean, she's very serious about this, and I think she'll do it. And I think, I think Tether is slippery, and I think there's a good chance that at some point, Gary Gensler, the SEC, said he's pro Bitcoin, but he's anti crypto fraud, and I'm good with that. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think it'll help the whole area, and so I think there's a chance at some point they will move against Tether, and the reception of that move will probably be a dip in the Bitcoin price.
You say that, but if people if there's a run on Tether, where does the money go? It goes into Bitcoin, perhaps.
Maybe. I mean, it's I don't know the actual mechanics of how it all works, but I do think that well, let me add another point to that on that line. An important point here is with Bitcoin is this is a very volatile asset. You don't want to get leveraged. I mean, that's the other thing I see around this space that gives me, as a guy who's been investing for 40 years, gives me a lot of concern. There's a lot of leverage.
Yep.
And okay, you're young, you want to invest in it, you believe in it, fine. But I would caution everybody to be careful with leverage because you don't want to lose your coins.
Yeah, I mean, I don't trade. I don't use leverage. The only leverage I did is I took an opportunist loan when the price dropped to 17.5% and bought like another 2.5 Bitcoin, which is worked out to be a fair trade. But I've got cash flow. I've got a business that's fairly successful.
Yeah.
I don't like people trading with leverage. I think it's scary. And if they do, it's like half. 0.5 or 1.
The issue with leverage is just that you don't want to be forced to lose the asset that you've levered that you know will have value in the future. And I'll give you an example. In March of 2020, I was somewhat levered on the gold stocks in this levered ETF. And so, March 2020, gold stocks plummeted. I mean, this levered ETF went down enormously, and it taught me a real lesson about the danger of leverage. I mean, and as you know, there have been times where you could lever Bitcoin 100 to 1, which is basically just giving your money away.
Yeah.
Right? And even 5 to 1 is a bad number.
Well, none of the pro traders I know do 5 or 10 to 1. They're
right.
The best 2 traders I know say they never go above 3 to 1.
Right. And honestly, I wouldn't go above 10%. I mean, my view is, okay, so you want to take a little leverage against it and buy a little more, fine, but something that you can handle.
I think just buy spot.
Yeah.
Put it away in your cold storage.
Exactly.
Forget about it and just keep doing that. That's you can win that way and focus on your career. It's so hard to trade, especially as you see these liquidation events where, I'm sure a lot of people aped in when we got near 67,000, think, right, we're going to go to 75, 80.
Oh, right.
Now we're back below 58. I mean, the people aping in keep getting liquidated.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it is going to a much higher number, though. I do know that. I believe that very sincerely, that it is the one monetary fire alarm that's really working. I mean, this gold suppression has just been perverse, and everybody says Bitcoin's going to demonetize gold, and it will over time, but gold's already been demonetized. I mean, I think that's an important point that, if you look at the numbers, gold and M2 are substitutes. In 1980, the gold we theoretically have in Fort Knox covered the M2 at the time. So we were kind of on a quasi-gold standard, even though it wasn't formal. You look at that today, and today's M2. I mean, it's like we've got 5% coverage. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, and so if gold were to adjust to its proper price, it would be multiples of where we are today. I mean, depending upon the coverage, it could be 10,000, 15,000, 20,000. And I think another case for being in gold is that at some point it might reset. I mean, we might wake up one morning and China says, "Hey, we're back in the yuan with gold, and we're setting it at this price," and suddenly gold is money. And China, India, and Russia are the 3 largest gold holders in the world. Well, we are too, theoretically, but that's something we don't know for sure.
Well, that's why I think maybe perhaps China is a little bit schizophrenic with their opinions on Bitcoin back and forth. I mentioned to you earlier that there's like this public, I think it's comment on unbanning Bitcoin, and my worry is they do that and they ban Bitcoin. But I do wonder if there's like this next phase is that like reality and understanding from governments that actually, or central banks, that we need to adopt Bitcoin. That the El Salvador project has been proven to be a success so far. And
not according to Steve Hanke.
Well, but that guy's an idiot. I mean, he's just delivering propaganda.
It's awful, isn't it?
It's truly awful.
It really is awful. Yeah.
There's 2 things.
He just lies blatantly.
Well, yeah, he's lying. So that's first of all, he's a liar, and to lie like that means you're morally broken. But secondly, it also feels like he has an agenda against a small Central American country that's trying to do something to
make their people's lives better. Yeah, what a concept, right?
And crazy, So they've provided banking services to the 70% who don't have banking services.
Right.
They've they now have free remittance through the Chivo ATMs. They have investment and opportunity happening in the country. And all he wants to talk about is the bond rate or crackpot idea here. And the sad thing about Hanke is there's things I agree with him on. When he tweets about Turkey, I think he's fundamentally correct. When he tweets about the economy, he's fundamentally correct.
Right.
We agree on the problem, but he is so anti-Bitcoin, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, yeah, it's, I believe we will ultimately go to a Bitcoin standard. I really do. And I think that's strategically the right thing for the United States to do. I think it is the form of sound money that will win. I mean, this is a digital age, and it has serious advantages versus gold. Having said that, though, let's there's a set of math that I think is important for people to understand that I'd like to kind of repeat, and it just has to do with how well both of these assets will do. They're both sound money assets, and if you consider the amount of fiat money out in the world, there's about 450 trillion of fiat money in the world today. That's cash, stocks, and bonds. Right now, the Bitcoin markets call it $1 trillion. The gold stock market call it $1 trillion. Tradable gold is $5 trillion. There's 10 trillion total gold, but a lot of it's in antiquities and around women's necks in India. So there's 7 trillion of sound money stuff in the world today. There's 450 trillion of
garbage.
Of fiat garbage.
Yeah.
Well, some of the stocks are valuable, but and I think that what's going to happen is, and we've had a 40-year deflation, so everyone's investing in the rearview mirror. Recent surveys showed lots of money managers believe that inflation is transitory. That's going to be the next bubble that bursts, in my opinion. A year from now, nobody will be saying inflation's transitory, and people are saying we've got a real inflation problem and the Fed's behind the curve. I think that's going to happen next year. So when that bubble bursts, people are going to think, if we got a real inflation problem, well, the first thing I do is I'm going to sell my bonds. Well, the bond market's $100 trillion plus, right, worldwide. So what happens if a piece of that 100 trillion says, okay, I got to go get some of that 7? Right? I mean, it doesn't take much, right? And so if, for example, you were to go back to the ratio that you used in the 70s, 7%, gold was about 7% of total financial assets at 1979-80 when it was kind of at its peak. So 7% of total financial. So if you went to that today, 7% of 450 is about $32 trillion. So the 7 trillion today of sound money assets is going to go to be 32 trillion if we just go to the 1980. That's almost 5x. Now, probably more of it will go to Bitcoin, but some of it's going to go to gold. I mean, I've got clients and boomer friends that they'll never buy Bitcoin. Doesn't matter before they're going to stick with their gold, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But they're both going to go up, right? They're both going to be sound money assets that perform substantially. And by the way, I think we're going to go much further than we went in 1980. I mean, I think this might be the end game event, which is when literally the currency fails. That's the hyperinflation. But to me, that's further out and uncertain. I can, and it's so hard to tell, but game theorying it all, I think inflation's going to get really, really bad. I think that we're going to have a real political upheaval, and people are going to know it, and we're going to somebody's going to arise in the political system that's going to go, this is the problem, it's with the money, and we've got to fix it. My candidate for that is Francis Suarez, who's the mayor of Miami, right? He's a Bitcoiner, and I think the guy's wonderful, right?
Yeah, so hopefully I'm going to be interviewing him
is that right?
in about a month. And my only issue is he's done this Miami coin junk, but
oh, really? I haven't seen that.
But he needs orange pilling a bit harder. But he's clearly someone thinks he's a potential presidential candidate.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
and he's we just need him to be a little bit more Bitcoin, a little less of this shitcoin junk.
He'll get there.
Yeah.
So I hope. So so I think inflation is going to get really bad, and we're going to reset. We're going to say, okay, look, we got a real problem here, and we just can't seem to stop it. We got to tie the money to something. Here's how we're going to do it.
Well, the reason I like a Bitcoin standard, Larry, is because I'm operating with one myself already.
Right.
The gold standard was really something was centralized by the government. They could take the country out of it as they did in the UK and they did here.
That's the weakness of it.
Yeah. But a Bitcoin standard is something which has a network effect. I'm on a Bitcoin standard, and perhaps you are.
I kind of am. I mean, I think in those terms, yeah.
Yeah, Jeremy, our camera guy's on one, and Danny, my producer, and some of my friends are, some aren't. But I'm on that standard, and what's happening is I am seeing my life improve because it's improving my net wealth position, but it's improving some of my thoughts around my own personal health and well-being and my children. It's given me that shift where I'm slowing down where everyone's speeding up.
Right. Here's the great thing about it. You don't feel like you're on the treadmill, right?
No, I'm off.
Right. You're off. It's like, and that's one of the things I tried to communicate to some of these people at this New Orleans gold show was, because as you can imagine, these people have been fighting this battle for a long time.
Yeah.
And they're tired and they're bitter and they hate the Fed. And I do too. I mean, it's all, but there's a certain kind of grim resignation to, oh, here we go, we're going to get screwed again, And I went to the Bitcoin show, Miami, 2021 Bitcoin show. Everybody is pumped. Yeah. I mean, it's like, this is great. We are going to crush this system. This is sound money. It's fair. Everyone can participate. It's a real democracy, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the mental mindset of the two groups it couldn't be more different.
Well, we figured it out.
Yeah, right. You did.
Figured out the hack in the system.
Yeah, you really did. And so in that respect, it really is superior. All I'm saying is, don't forget us.
Well, look, listen, you're
drag us along. We've been carrying this water for a long time.
You're with us. You're with us. The other thing I like about the Bitcoin community is they're creating enormous wealth for themselves, but they're very generous.
Oh, absolutely.
I know a lot of people support a lot of projects, support other people, and
yeah, absolutely.
I think we're going to go into difficult times,
yes.
And I believe in humans.
Yep.
I believe in the generosity of humans to help people out.
Absolutely.
When times are hard. So I do worry. I was talking about this to a guy I did an interview with a couple of weeks ago. It's sometimes, you might see figures or inflation, or you might see Janet Yellen, or you might tweet it out and put clown and make memes and laugh about it. But there is this thing that's like constantly on my shoulder. I'm constantly thinking, some people are going to go through a really rough time, and we may see a massive increase in poverty and destruction of parts of the economy, and people are going to really struggle. And that really kind of like hurts my heart.
Do you remember the scene in The Big Short where the Ben Rickard character basically, the two guys are kind of high-fiving each other like, hey, it's working. We're gonna be rich. We're gonna make millions and millions of dollars. And the Rickard character's like, hang on, shut up. Get that under control. People are going to lose their jobs. People are going to lose their houses.
Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt was playing that. This is not something to celebrate about. And that I think that's a very important part of it. I mean, Jeff Booth does a wonderful job of this. I mean, I think it's very important for Bitcoiners to try to remain as humble as possible. And the two memes I don't like about Bitcoin, and one is the not going to make it meme, and the other is the have fun staying poor. I don't think they're constructive. I think we want to save and help people, not mock them or belittle them in any way, shape, or form. I think it should be a very inclusive community.
Yeah, it's fun. I understand what you mean about that. I think those memes are used mainly and directed at the wealthy people or the academic class or political class doesn't get it.
I understand that. I
don't think they're pointed
A lot of people pointed out to me that, look, that's in reaction to Peter Schiff telling me I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
He's going to call me an idiot. I'm going to say have fun staying poor. I get it. But for those, consider that a lot of people, they don't have a dog in the fight. They're just, clueless, running along, trying to run their lives. And I know Bitcoiners are very generous. If you ask for help, they'll give you help. Mm-hmm. But even people who maybe don't entirely get it, I've orange pilled a lot of people who started off pretty negative on it, and I could have just said, "Have fun staying poor," and I've tried to counter it and say, no, think this through. I understand your concern. One of the big things that gold bugs really have a hard time getting around is the notion it's not physical.
It's not tangible.
Right? How can I touch it? I said, guys, money never. How can you can't touch the money in your bank account either?
Hey, listen, just say. Do you still using a Kodak film?
Right.
Are you still visiting Blockbuster? Right. Or are you using Netflix? And are you on Spotify? You've got CDs. Money is just the last thing that's being digitized.
Well, as I say, it's a ledger. Before gold even existed, I love this example. Somebody explained it to me this way. We had ledgers in caves. I killed 2 bison, you killed 3 bison, I owe you a bison. Money's just keeping score. Who owes who what? And it doesn't have to be a physical item. Now, it turned out that gold became a very useful physical item when people were running around the world trading, so that in Genoa and Italy and so forth, when they were trading with the East, they could use gold. But
my friend John Pfeffer, do you know John?
I do. I know who he is. I don't know him personally, but yeah.
So I was having lunch with him in London a few months back, and he was telling me how Wentz's orange pilled him. And he said a very simple thing. He said, money is just a ledger.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the best ledger that's ever existed.
Exactly.
That's it.
That's beautifully succinct. Yeah, and Wences is great. I love that guy.
I love that guy.
Yeah, he's really impressive. And that's kind of how I got orange pilled too. Somebody explained that to me, and I thought, wow, that's true.
So do you think something like the Fed eventually collapses and doesn't exist? And how do you think society operates without
Yeah, we don't need it. We don't need it. We really don't need it. I mean, I think how does it exactly collapse? I don't know. One of the things I would caution all listeners to all of my podcasts to understand is I don't know for sure that I'm right about this stuff.
Yeah, well, we're all speculating,
right? I mean, I'm just and everything's just a probability bet. I mean, hyperinflation, could it happen? Yeah, I think it could. Is it going to happen? I have no idea if it's certain. I think the Fed will be gone. I mean, I think the federal government will be severely cut back when it's starved of its source of money, and we may return very much more to kind of the original constitutional republic that we had when we first launched this country. I think that might happen with a lot of governments. I mean, or I could see a situation where Bitcoiners end up being big participants in the government. I made this observation before that it seems like the people in government often are the people who have a lot of money. They have the time to fiddle around and they want to do something, and so they get into government. Well, I could see, I've said this, and I truly do believe this. I think in this turning, I think the Bitcoiners and the gold people are going to end up with all the marbles. I really do. I think we're going to win, and we're going to be kind of insanely rich. And I think when that happens, and that creates a real problem. I mean, it's Kipling's, meet with, triumph and disaster and treat the two just the same, right? I mean, this is triumph. And the humility and the helping our fellow man and the doing the right thing is going to be extremely important. But I'll tell you, just today, based on what I know, I would much rather have a government full of Bitcoiners than the government we got.
Well, right? look at the people within government that you can trust the most. I mean, Cynthia Lummis, I don't agree with her on everything, but I agree with her on money. And we've just had Rand Paul come out and say we expect to move to a Bitcoin standard. I mean, I'm not in the slightest bit a fan of Ted Cruz, but he's talking sense on money now. When people understand Bitcoin, they start to talk about something that makes sense. Yeah. And now if you end up with Bitcoiners in government, game theory says they want to keep supporting Bitcoin and they won't want to support the old system. And if they're the ones who get in significantly rich, they're going to have the power to do that. So the game theory just works out.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, the whole notion that government's going to ban Bitcoin, that was one of my, I had a part of my getting to a big allocation. I was fearful of that. And I have a lot of gold friends that's their major objection. I get it. It's a secure ledger. I love all of that. But you know what? You guys think this is going to work and the government's just going to squash you like a bug.
I think we're beyond that point now.
I do too.
I think Gensler signaling.
Yeah. The horse has bolted the barn. And those guys generally don't understand how tough it is to squash this thing like a bug. I mean, 12 words and you can't touch my wealth.
I think there's on the geopolitical level as well now, that there is clearly an element of a Cold War between China and the US being established. I don't think, I worry about what's going to happen with Taiwan, but I don't think the US is going to militarily step in front
hope not.
Because there's no winner and we're all losers.
I sure hope not.
I think the currency wars are the really interesting wars of the next decade.
Right.
And I think it's very clear that Bitcoin benefits the US. I mean, firstly,
absolutely.
If the US is pro-Bitcoin, most of the rest of the world will follow and be pro-Bitcoin. Yes. So that's that point. The US has most of the large companies with Bitcoin, and I would estimate most of a good percent of the Bitcoin is held within people in the US. So maybe the government owns some Bitcoin or not, but if Bitcoin continues to grow, it strengthens the US.
Totally. And I think, somebody said it on Twitter that China just made one of the largest strategic errors in their history. I mean, They made a similar error in the 1800s when they went with silver versus gold, and gold demonetized silver. Yeah. And Jason Lowery's done great work on this. I mean, we need to adopt a Bitcoin standard vis-a-vis China, because if we go to a gold standard, China, India, and Russia, three very corrupt countries, although we're somewhat corrupt too, they win, right? Because they've got a lot more gold than we probably have. And, we've got a lot more technology than they've got. And so I think it's natural. I think it's what will happen. I think the Pentagon's going to get it too. I think, what's happened here in the last 20, 30, 40 years is, we made some big strategic errors as a country. We letting China into the WTO without true reciprocity, huge error. Mm-hmm. Abandoning Glass-Steagall, huge error. Letting Wall Street become as dominant as it has done, and letting, the Fed, which is really controlled by Wall Street, do what they've done, huge error, right? Well, going off the gold standard, huge error, right? And so those of us who remember what it was like before all those errors, we're kind of like, hey, I want my old country back.
Well, also the distraction of 20 years of war in the Middle East.
Well, that's right. Well, yeah, that's not to mention, all the money we've spent overseas, and all the guys who've come back, guys and girls who've come back, shot up or dead. I mean, it's tragic. I mean, the Vietnam War was tragic. All this stuff is tragic, and these things are all, part of the life of the nation state. I mean, as my personal guy I work out with, my weightlifting coach says, war is the sex organ of the nation state, right? And he's right. I mean, these guys, it gives them power, and they want it. And the average, Vietnamese guy, he doesn't want to kill Americans. The average American, I don't want to kill Vietnamese guys, but you put us on their soil and they get mad. I mean, it happens, right? And who did that? The state did it.
Well, it's like what Muhammad Ali said. He said, I've got no problem with these people.
I love that man.
They put him in fucking jail.
I know. I love that man. I mean, I think that was one of the bravest things any American, leader has done in a long time. I thought that was just an amazing story when he did that. So, it's So yes, I mean, the beautiful thing is this thing is happening, and it's really positive. I mean, it's why people are optimistic, and that's why I'm optimistic.
Yeah,
that it is happening. Yeah.
I mean, my question really is, how do I continue to talk to my friends and family? But I just think it's becoming inevitable now, and there's so much news coverage of this. There's like a mix of news coverage. You get announcements,
right,
news releases of things happening, like, the futures product or a company, achieving a certain value. Like there's all these positive stories of events within Bitcoin, and then there's analysis and op-eds, which are always fun and usually incorrect.
Yeah. Right.
And I feel like that's the battle some people are having. They're just seeing this nonsense. They still think this is magic, funny money.
Yeah.
But I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a shift as things get worse, as we see higher inflation, much higher inflation, and people realize this is really affecting them. They're going to question.
Right.
We're going to be ready to say, remember that Bitcoin thing I told you about?
Well, that's right. I've already seen that. I've had a half a dozen of my clients and investors in my fund who were very, very negative on it. They now completely get it. And I could see, you can almost mark, you can mark the steps, as they go through it. And it's got positive things going on for two reasons. One, additional monetary debasement makes its price go up. But two, we're kind of, and this is on our website and so forth, you can see it, that we're kind of at this inflection point. And Gladwell's tipping point, 10%, and things get going. And you look at full adoption of broadband or full adoption of autos or mobile phones or whatever it might be, tends to take about 10 years. So, if we're at the 10% tipping point now, what's that, 2021? I would think that 10% is going to be a big number in 10 years.
Well, there's big moves. This week alone, we have MasterCard announcing that they're going to support cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. We have the FDIC chairman saying he's going to make it easier for banks. These are two huge stories.
Yes.
Huge stories.
Yes. And you've got big organizations embracing it. Rick Ryder, BlackRock. There's no more connected money management firm than BlackRock. They're probably the largest in the world, right? And the guy who runs the place is saying he's in favor of Bitcoin.
Larry Fink.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about Larry Fink, but I know Rick Ryder, the next guy down, he doesn't run the place. He's like number 2 lieutenant. Okay. But Fidelity's there, Goldman's there, a lot of other people are there. It's kind of obvious. It's kind of obvious, and it's kind of inevitable, in my opinion. And but it'll take time. It's like any new idea. It takes time to be adopted. And so, but people, everyone who gets involved, then they become another spreader of the orange pill to their group of friends, and we just kind of keeps rolling. So it's exciting. It's fun to be involved with it. As I say again, I was in the internet in '95, and this feels exactly the same. Mm-hmm. It feels, and I had people who were very skeptical, saying, "Oh, that thing, I don't believe in the internet. Yeah. Why do you invest in that? That's not going to work." And I was like, I don't know, guys. I think this, I know you got to put your phone in a modem and wait for the dial to go, but I think this thing's going to work, and it's not always going to be that clunky and slow. This isn't going to be CompuServe forever. This isn't going to be AOL forever. Mm-hmm. They're going to make it better, right? And that's what's going on here. Every problem that's out there is getting worked on and getting solved. Key management, security, et cetera. So
it's a peaceful revolution. It's funny. I'm spending some time down in Texas, and I'm not a gun nut. I've shot a gun once in the UK, which was a shotgun.
Right. Sure.
Pigeon shooting, and But every time I go out to Texas, my friends are like, "Come, let's go and shoot guns," and I do, and I enjoy it. And then we have the debate, and they say, "You need the guns." I was like, "Why do we need the guns?" Because tyrannical government. We had them in 1776. We got rid of you after we tried to give us a tax on our tea, and we need them if our government becomes tyrannical. And my view is like, I think it already is tyrannical.
It is.
I mean, you have New York is a different place than it used to be. California is. So I was like, well, when do you pull your guns out? But I actually think you don't need your guns because you're Bitcoin. Bitcoin is now your defense against a tyrannical government.
Well, that's right.
And that's what we should be communicating to people, let them understand.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. I mean, look, the money is the health of the state, right? I mean, the money's broken. It's broken from our point of view because they're screwing us. It's working perfectly from their point of view because they're getting seigniorage on everything, And so in my speech in New Orleans, as I said, you want to argue and fight. You want to push back. You want to have a revolution. Without guns. Buy Bitcoin, buy gold, buy silver. Because when we take away their ability to print money, when we say, hey, government, it's the ultimate vote of no confidence. Everyone thinks the voting system's broken. Are the elections rigged? Who knows? I don't want to go there. But the point is, this is the vote, right? This is the vote that counts. Where are you going to put your savings? If everybody in this country starts putting their IRAs, and goes into saving. I mean, one thing that's actually terrible that's been having a bunch of terrible things coming out of the government recently. This whole notion of $600 reporting. I mean, that's right. I mean, what's that all about? As you can tell, they're getting desperate, right? They're trying to figure out more stuff. And they've also talked about trying to restrict these self-directed IRAs, right? And a lot of people are using those to opt out of the Fidelities of the world because they want to put their money in gold or Bitcoin or something else. And Fidelity won't let them. And so, this is the way we fight back.
There was a great tweet recently that somebody put out. I think I mentioned it before on the show where they said, the government can lose trillions of dollars, but they want to know what I spend over 600.
Yeah, right?
Fuck off.
Yeah,
Come on.
Exactly. But once again, this all falls into the bucket of the emperor protesting, and the more we put heat on them, the more they will protest and the more absurd their behavior will become. And then more and more people will go, this is ridiculous, and I'm bailing out of here. I mean, I think this reminds me of a situation when I was a kid. My family was moderately anti-war in the Vietnam War. We didn't really fully understand it. I mean, I was a young kid, and I was looking at having a number and having to go. But I'll never forget when Kent State went down, my father looked at me and he just said, that's it, war's over.
What's Kent State?
Kent State, the murder in Kent State. So in Kent State in 1970, the National Guard was out on the quad, and a bunch of students were out there, anti-war protesters, were out there protesting. That's what Neil Young wrote the song Ohio about. And 4 students were killed. The National Guard took the rifles down and shot and killed 4 students. It's really sad. And but when that happened, my father said to me, he said, "That's it, war's over." He said, "There's no way this government is going to allow, this war to go on. I mean, if we've got, National Guardsmen killing students on colleges, there's your tipping point, right? There's your tipping point. And that's going to happen, somewhere monetarily. And people are just going to go, shit, it's over."
Is that protest when there was a film I saw recently?
Yeah, there have been some documentaries on it. They're very good. Yeah.
A little bit emotional there.
Yeah, well, yeah, I did. It's just a sad episode. I mean, I think of all the things the government has done and the pain and suffering it's caused and the lives lost. I mean, I went to Vietnam, 2-3 years ago, and
I was there 2 or 3 years ago.
No, it was even more than that, probably 5 or 6 years ago. But I went to Vietnam. Yeah. Is my point. And a lot of people there weren't particularly friendly, and I get it. And 3 million Vietnamese died, and yet Henry Kissinger walks around New York and he's free. To fight communism, really? I mean, was that a good thing? I mean, I think people have to think a little bit about what these nation states are capable of doing, in our name. And I feel pretty strongly about the fact that it's incumbent upon those of us who are moral and care and are in a position to do so that we push back hard on this stuff.
I feel the same about Iraq. I mean, Vietnam's before my time. I only know it from Platoon and what my father told me. And I barely remember the first Iraq War, but the second Iraq War, we had some of the largest protests Ever in the UK, my brother protested. We had people resign from government, and we know now that Blair and Bush lied and took us into a war.
Absolutely.
1.5 million dead, the region destabilized. And what are they doing? Blair's getting speaking fees, and does he work at the UN? Fuck knows. I mean, fuck that guy. It just we got taken. We knew what happened. We saw it happen in front of us.
But Halliburton did extremely well.
Of course, they did.
And we, and you know what? We were able to finance it. And guess what? As Vice President Cheney said, deficits don't matter. I mean, and that's the Stephanie Kelton line, right? These deficits don't matter. And all of these people are driving in the rearview mirror. And they're going to be, I mean, history is going to be so unkind to so many of the people that have done what they've done in the last 20 or 30 years. It's going to be incredibly unkind, and rightly so.
Rightly so.
And rightly so, in my opinion. I mean, the person you were talking about, other leaders here, the Fed, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, our grandkids are going to say, what were those people thinking that they let, an unelected bunch of people grab control of the money supply, and create the largest bubble of the world, which when it burst, created enormous economic pain. That goes back to your earlier point, that a lot of people are going to get hurt in this. I mean, they really are, and it's very, very sad. But, I'm not a central banker. I didn't set the system up. I'm just one man, looking at it from my point of view and just trying to protect my family and my investors and other Americans by doing what I think makes the most sense in light of the circumstances, right? And so, some of these people, I'm not even sure. I mean, look, we all have good and evil in us, right? So I'm not even sure. I mean, some of them are obviously very evil. I mean, the Epsteins of the world. But the point is, a lot of these other people, I mean, they're probably just misguided. They just don't know any better. I mean, Krugman kind of strikes me as just kind of a goofy idiot. I mean, he got the Nobel Prize, but I'm not sure he's evil. I just don't think he's very smart.
I just consider it a bad organism.
Yeah.
With misaligned incentives.
Well,
and I think that's why we need the checks and balances, and that's why we need sound money.
Yeah, and really, the math doesn't lie, right? I mean, that's the beauty of the whole thing. I mean, human beings, we're all flawed. We're all capable of cheating. We're all capable of doing things that aren't right. But, if you've got something based on technology and math that is immutable, it's a pretty important thing. And I've said it in my papers, I said it in my speech. I do think it's probably the most important invention in world history. I mean, the printing press and fire and a lot of other things that we invented before were at the time the most important invention. But I think this one's going to really rock the world. And I'm extremely, extremely optimistic on the longer term. But I do worry a lot about what the next 5 or 10 years are going to look like. I mean, I'm sure you've read The Fourth Turning.
I have. I did an interview with Brandon Quittem about it.
Oh, there you go. So things are coming to a head. I mean, things are happening more quickly now, and so what's going to happen when Bitcoin's at 250, which it will be at some point? I mean, the monetary fire alarm is going off now. It's going to be going nuts when Bitcoin's at 250.
Yeah, my only worry about that is the people who see that and are bitter and become anti-Bitcoin because they're bitter about it, rather than seeing it's something they should be part of and understand the benefits of it.
I get it, and everyone buys at the price that they deserve, right? I mean, it's a system that makes sense. It's a sound money system that makes sense, and I know in my case, I have a lot of people say, well, gosh, I missed it. I should have bought it at 10. It's at 50 or 60. I can't buy it now.
Well, you know the answer to that.
What?
I'm not selling.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's our answer to it. But
yeah.
But I think I think it's hard for people to reframe it, and understand that if it's the best saving system in the world, forget the price. Why wouldn't you just want to save in those terms? I mean, what's gonna make it go the other way? I can't really see anything.
Buy a little bit.
Exactly.
Buy a little bit. Just get started.
That's exactly right.
Once you get them to buy a little bit, once you show them a transaction and say, that just happened without any intermediary.
Right.
The economic policy, the monetary policy is fixed.
Right.
Go and listen to this podcast. You can get them to buy a bit and listen to one podcast.
Yeah.
They're off. You've just got to like that kickstart.
Yeah. No, that's right. And more and more people will do it. And people say, well, it's hard to do it, and how's this thing going to support 6 billion people? Well, that's where Lightning and all these other, layers that are built on top of it are going to make it much more efficient and easy to do transactions and so on and so forth. I mean, obviously, one of the other great concerns some people have had is, well, what happens when we run out of new coins? I mean, it's obviously quite some time off, and the fees will cover it. You know, I mean, SAFE has done a good job of talking about how the math will change to allow the fees to pay for it, you know, the electricity cost.
Everything seems to work out just fine for Bitcoin.
Well, it does. I mean,
it's so beautifully designed.
Yeah, it really is. As you dig into it and you think about, I mean, who invented this difficulty adjustment? Who thought of the halving process? I mean, man, oh man, the people who, you know, the group that designed this, I mean, I think Hal Finney is clearly either Satoshi or was very close to Satoshi in the whole process. I mean, these guys were really smart. I mean, they really, because there have been a lot of guys trying to figure out a way to create digital gold pre-Bitcoin, but there was always a missing piece. There was always some kind of missing piece. And, you know, when they got the proof of work and they got the algorithm and they got the adjustment and they got the halving, you know, suddenly it all kind of came together and it coalesced, and here we are, you know. And it's really kind of early days, and you know, in my view. I mean, in 10 years, everyone will think this was obvious.
Yeah.
It was obvious. So,
listen, it's been great to talk to you.
Likewise.
Is there anything we didn't cover?
Not that I can think of. I think we hit most of the highlights. Happy to fill in other stuff if you can think of it now after the fact. Or
well, what we'll do is these people are seeing these documents. We'll share them in the show notes. Let people read them. It was a fascinating read for me, and so we can always do this again. I'm going to be back. I'm sure we could talk about a lot more in the future. I think you'd be great to sit down with is Greg Foss. I think you and him together.
I love Greg. He's a good friend. Yeah. So he and I were in New Hampshire at this Sound Money thing, or at this thing, and Greg is fabulous. I mean, he's kind of my generation, and in fact, I quoted him in the speech. I said, Bitcoin's he said this line, and it hit me like a thunderbolt, where he said, yeah, Bitcoin is a CDS on sovereign currency. It's a credit default swap. It is. That's exactly what it is. It's a credit. I mean, it's the most asymmetric trade in the history of the world. I mean, these things are going to be worth tens of millions of dollars per coin. I mean, having one coin is going to be a big deal. Yeah. It's going to be a really, really big deal.
Those guys with a few thousand, they're gonna have some fun.
Yeah, I mean, I got some great stories on that. Luke Groman has a friend who was a miner who was in Akron. He's a famous name. I can't remember it now, but he had 10,000 coins, right? So he's a billionaire, basically. Yeah. And then you'll like this. So I was involved with the Ron Paul project in the early days. Are we still?
Yeah, we're still rolling.
Oh, okay. There was a person up in the Ron Paul group who, she didn't make a lot of money. She was a secretary, but somebody told her about Bitcoin and Sound Money and so on and so forth. And so when it was, $2, $5 a coin, something, she picked up a couple hundred coins.
Nice.
Right?
Good for her.
I think she still has them.
Right. Even better.
How great is that?
Yeah, you know what? Oh, God. I think back and think what I should have done and what I didn't do.
Don't we? We all feel like we don't own enough, right? And I think, I bought a lot at 3,800 when it did that dip to 35. And I was like, well, why didn't I buy more? I had it. I could have,
It's funny. We all think that, but then we don't want to spend it. So it's a really interesting kind of position to be in, but we did discover it, and we have this opportunity, you with your right and me with this, to try and spread this message, and I want a lot more people to get in.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, sound money will improve the world.
Yep.
And Bitcoin is a form of sound money. Gold is too.
Yeah, and gold is too.
Gold is too.
So listen, Larry, if people want to read your work or follow you, how do they follow you?
Yeah, so there are really two ways. We put a lot of this up on the web. We do a quarterly letter. This is all free. Talks about how we see conditions and how we're managing our fund. And, we manage a fund which people can join if they're qualified. All this information is on my website. It's EMA2, Edward Mark Alpha, the number 2.com for Equity Management Associates. And then I'm kind of a loudmouth on Twitter, which is probably how I got here. So if you go to Twitter and you put in my full name, my formal name, Lawrence Lepard, just as one word, you'll see me on Twitter, and I try and contribute on a regular basis. All sound money, that's what I care about.
Awesome. Well, look, I really appreciate this.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it very much. It's been fun.
Yeah, hopefully we'll do it again sometime, maybe next year.
Anytime. Happy to do it, Peter.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah, bye.